everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's calendar year 2023, and we are here to talk about Amadeus. My name is Timo, of course, joined by Tucker, Tanner, and Abram. And as your conductor for this episode of the Quest for the Bestest, I'm so pleased to be back in 2023. We are keeping on. But we're going to talk about this movie. Don't worry. But today, more than most days, we have housekeeping to do. So I'm going to do our normal quest housekeeping and then hand it over to Tucker for a little additional quest housekeeping.
A big announcement
from Tucker right after I tell you that last episode, way back last year, oh my God, I haven't done a quest episode in a year. Not really, but
that's not the saying.
We talked about In the Heat of the Night, which we decided was so good that it deserved a spot at number 10 on our list. We gave In the Heat of the Night a 9.2 average score. Very high, very well-deserved. Sidney Poitier, man, we really like that film. So if you liked it, or you'd never heard of it, or you hated it, I would recommend you go check out that review. It's one for the history books. Now,
yes.
Well, our normal quest housekeeping dictates that I must hand it off to Abram for our featured comment. We've had quite a long time to build up to some sort of comment from somebody somewhere. Abram, did you find something?
If we have just one comment, Timo, and it comes from one of our many sons, Dan's.
Yeah.
We can always count on Dan's.
Always count on Dan's. He says, "Great movie, and you all had great points that you covered. I was 11 when this came out, and we were not allowed to see movies like this. We went to Disney, Doris Day, Don Knotts movies. I didn't see this until I was an adult. I loved it for all the reasons he spoke of. I think its biggest competition that year was The Graduate, but this was better. Of course, the Academy nominated Dr. Dolittle as well. If you want to see how bad the nominations get, just watch that. I put In the Heat of the Night toward the top of the list. It just showed at the theaters about a month ago. We went and enjoyed it immensely."
Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan's.
All right, Tucker. You are the adjudicator of this announcement. Speak forth and let the people know.
Yeah, this is time for a very special announcement because the biggest change in the history of not only Quest but our entire YouTube careers is coming up. We are deciding to split our channel into twain. We are putting the movie content on a brand new channel entitled Back Lot Banter, which you've seen floating around as the name of a show or two. It's flip-flopping around like, what does this actually mean? But the channel, as you know it now, is going to move to just being our video game content. The discussions that Abram and I do, our reviews, our Backlog Banter official series, and all the movie stuff. That means Quest, that means our weekly movie reviews, that means our monthly Backlot Banter series, that means anything we do for Oscars discussion or award season discussion, that all is getting kicked over to a new channel. So if you want to keep up with all this nonsense, go subscribe to that channel. That link will be in the description. Once that channel is up, it won't be up as the time of uploading, but it'll be up for the rest of history. So, most of time it'll be available in the description. If you're watching this at some point in history, that's a great time to go look.
Back Lot Banter. That's BACKLOT They sound similar, so I feel like I gotta sound it out.
And and links will be all over everywhere on our BLB channel as it stands now. So hopefully, if you open the YouTube app in between the time that this video releases and when the next Quest video releases, you should be notified and able to head on over there. And of course, help us out by subscribing and throwing a comment down below where you think we need to hear how we're wrong. That really helps the algorithm.
Yes, absolutely.
And keep in mind, it's not changing on audio feeds. Honestly, I don't know if our audio feed is called Backlog Banter. I have no clue. But wherever you listen to the podcast right now, it's not moving.
Yep.
No.
And also, keep in mind, you go to a new channel, you'll find a playlist of all the old Quest videos. So it's going to be real simple. It's going to be straightforward.
Also, if you just look up Quest and then the movie title, you're going to find it. So it's really going to be no different.
But also, know who's reviewing Amadeus. You know what I mean? People are going to find these movies. They're going to find Quest. You're going to be fine. Trust me. You're going to be fine.
We'll get through this together.
But I think it's also worth pointing out that the first Quest videos that will be going up there will not be particularly this series. We'll be talking about the new Best Picture nominees for the 2023 Oscars.
That is right.
Yes. Yeah. And we'll be kicking it off with the potential, presumed, whatever you want to call it, winner, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. So if you haven't caught that big hit of 2022, make sure to watch that before we kick off our Best Picture nominees discussions.
Yeah. So Quest for the Bestest continues on as normal. We gotta finish this thing. We are so close. We get another. I'm so happy to hit the nominees again this year. It's our third year doing it, and man, we got a good slate. I'm looking forward to all
Almost
that.
ready to drink.
Almost.
Comparatively.
Uh-huh.
All right, enough messing around. Amadeus, does it get 1 yawn from you? 2 yawns? Our emperor. I don't know who's our emperor today. Who would we look to see if this movie was good or not? I don't
I'll
know.
be
What did
Abram.
you
Let's
think?
go with
Abram,
Abram.
what did you think of this
Abram.
movie?
They didn't pick me. Wow. I think Amadeus is awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this movie. I think I think that while watching it, there were individual moments when I thought, man, I don't like this. And when sort of the lion's share of my criticism is hinged upon individual moments of the film where I'm like, I'm kind of off the train here, it means it's a pretty damn good movie. Because I find Amadeus on the whole to be close to flawless. I think that these are some of the best performances we've seen for Quest. I think that the editing is particularly remarkable. The use of sound, I'm sure we'll turn over to Timo for that. And just the ability of the film not only to make classical music cool, but the ability to make a 3-hour-long film about classical composers compelling. And I would go as far as to say enthralling as your buzzword of the day. I think is incredibly impressive. So I loved Amadeus.
Yeah. I also really like this movie as well. I think what really compels me about this movie is that it's not a biopic. It is a complete subversion of what real Mozart's story was. They're adding extra elements. They're creating this, this rivalry, this one-sided rivalry ostensibly between Salieri and Mozart that blossoms and ebbs and flows across the course of the movie, but it is through that rivalry and the fact that it's not just based on history, it's not trying to hit the big moments of Mozart's life that makes this movie so compelling. It's just a story, a really compelling rivalry story with these themes about artistry and mediocrity and what it means to be involved in the arts in the time like this that happens to feature people who were real at one point, but they're so completely removed from our modern life that they feel like characters anyway. So I really like how, well, technically based in history, this feels like a grand operatic ridiculous story that also shines a light on how ridiculous some of these people were, the high class was. It's got these really interesting subversion of themes and of class in this movie that I found really, really compelling.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dissent from any of this. I found Amadeus was probably the one of the remaining films that I haven't seen, the one that I was anticipating the most to watch, because I only hear good things, and all those good things are very well warranted. Amadeus is a pretty incredible film all around, I would say, and I think it really comes down to the writing and performances for me, just because on a macro scale, I love the framing device of Amadeus, because we've had pick your lion's share of boring Best Picture biopics or good Best Picture biopics, but what this one does, it's called Amadeus, but the main character is not Amadeus. The main character is the one, the only Antonio Salieri, and I just find that fascinating that the character that we are following is essentially the antagonist to Amadeus's story, though Amadeus doesn't even know it. It's such a
It's the King Richard of its day.
In a lot of ways, I think so. But no, obviously the production design is amazing, the direction is amazing, the lighting, the sound, the everything. But I really want to dedicate time talking to F. Murray Abraham as Antonio Salieri, Tom Hulce, correct,
Yes.
Tucker? Tom Hulce as Amadeus, and the other characters that revolve around this really one-sided rivalry that the film is concerned with.
Well, Tanner, you seem very excited. If you could imagine, I'm not going to dissent. I like this movie also. And I agree. I want to talk about these performances because I think you're exactly right. They really land us in a spot where it's just so easy to understand what is going on. I think the film does an excellent job modernizing and yet without losing the flavor of this, antique historical period. It's what time? What I don't remember what century we're in.
Don't know. Don't care.
It's not
1870s?
Who knows? But
Who's to say?
they kind of speak in a way that I can understand, and they act sort of in ways that I can gather, and so I find myself being very interested in this film the whole way through. I really care about what's going on, and towards the end of the film, I think this rivalry narrative is taken in such interesting ways. I think that in unexpected ways, where the rivalry is like unfulfilled. It's an unfulfilled rivalry to spoil the 45-year-old movie, but I really enjoyed it, and I think Abram, you're also right that there is really interesting stuff going on, framing wise, editing wise. I didn't pick up on so much awesome, cool sound moments. Or at least I can't remember any right now. But there are
Got a couple big ones I can mention.
Well, actually, you're wrong. I'm wrong. I'm talking to
You're
me.
wrong.
You are wrong.
Okay.
No, me. Timo, you are wrong. There are some great
Point in
sound
mirror.
movements. I think the sound editing, now that I start diving into it and thinking about it more, which I will
take very
explain.
long.
No, of course not. Of course. Who do you think I am?
Uh-huh.
It's great. I think there's just awesome moments all around. I am curious though, Abram, what were the moments that, like, I don't know, didn't quite pull you in? Didn't were those momentary aberrations? Let's say that we don't have to talk about it now.
Ooh.
But
Yeah, I mean,
word.
if you want to start
Sure.
start by shitting on the movie, I'm more than happy to.
well, it'll leave a good taste in the audience's mouth at the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll frame it. I'll frame it this way. When I opened up Amadeus, I was like, "Oh God, it's 3 hours long." Because I will note, by the way, we watched the director's cut. The theatrical cut has basically been scrubbed from the internet.
None of it. So we don't really know what they added versus there's
I know a few things.
20 minutes of bonus
20 minutes
footage.
difference.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it's not quite as substantial as the Batman vs Superman Dawn of Justice Ultimate Edition, but it's a
No.
pretty significant amount of new footage.
Yeah.
But my concern going in is like, oh, this is going to be sort of a dry historical drama, and it's going to drag. And I can think of really one particular sequence that did, and that's when Amadeus is watching vaudeville that he has no part of, and there's a horse on stage, and the horse is pooping out sausage links and various things, and it's fun, but it's a very prolonged sequence. It's one of many of sequences of long choreographed opera. But what I think is different about this one, and sort of left me a little bit detached, is that our core players, Salieri and Amadeus, have no hand in the composition or anything. We're kind of up in the balcony watching this. So I was lost there a little bit, but I think it's partially because those sequences otherwise are so strong. I think the film does a very good job of making opera feel very, very personal, despite so much of the sort of the appeal or the awe evocation of opera is that it feels enormous. But we're always seeing what's happening on stage, and then we're cutting back to Amadeus covered in sweat, doing his composition and everything. And there's a real sense of that.
Well, I hope
and
he's
like
not
that.
composing at the moment.
Or his orchestra. I don't know. I don't know if
Conducting.
music. Because he's doing his conducting.
There you go.
And I think that's a really successful device for framing almost the personal stakes of the show, as we're jumping between conductor and stage and audience. With the exception of that one vaudeville act, I think there's always this real sense of dynamic tension in these opera moments.
It makes me think, Abram, because I will be real. I do not care about opera. I am uninterested. It's
Don't
not.
raise your hand. Woo, me neither.
Say I. But because of these personal stakes, because of all this context that the film gives us as to why this opera matters or where it came from in the writing of it, and the actual, even though the film, I think, delights in showing us a lot of the opera, and it does a good job at making it, for the most part, not like super boring as it would be to go see the opera in real life. And it makes it entertaining. I get to hear cool music. I get to see some dancing and some impressive singing. And then at the end, I get to see all these characters like interact. And there's always new drama as a result of one of these many operas that we see. And so I think the film very much succeeds in making a medium that is difficult for modern audiences to get very much into, very like filmic centered. It like works because it's in a movie, and it uses the moviness of the of its story, of the way we tell this narrative of Amadeus to its advantage in using other mediums to like prop up all of our messages and our really, I think, our character building all happens. Is this movie? It's a character study. I mean, the plot is not like so many things not so many things just happen, but so much happens in terms of what these characters think and how they look at each other. So that is a very enjoyable thing for me to watch.
Mm-hmm.
The editing, I think, is why the film keeps itself so engaging for that long runtime. This is a snappy film, pacing-wise, for as long as it is, because you're never in one place for a very long time, or even when you are in one place, you're cutting around in that one place. So there's not the extended sequence of watching the vaudeville on stage. I think you're absolutely right, Tanner. I had a similar reaction to that scene where we're sitting there like, this feels like something that was maybe extended in the director's cut of like, this doesn't feel like particularly pertinent to the story. And there were a few of those moments, especially like when we are watching the opera go on stage, I'm like, okay, I wish this was trimmed down a little bit so we could get back to what I am, hungry to see, which is how is Salieri really thinking about this? What is his plan after he's seen this to go do whatever he does about town? But I think that it's also the framing not only of this through a one-sided rivalry, but through narration, Salieri's narration that we start the movie with, that keeps this movie interesting right from the start. Because we start off, we see that Salieri has attempted suicide. He is complaining or not complaining, but like he's telling people that he's gone crazy because and he wants to end his own life because he was the one that caused the death of Mozart, as we learn throughout the film that was his intention. But was that actually fulfilled? I think we can talk about a little bit in terms of Salieri's motivation. But watching him sit in this jail cell / insane asylum hospital area telling the priest his story is really, really interesting, because you watch this man who, for the vast majority of the film, we're in his shoes, we're watching the world through his eyes, tell the story of his past, but not about really his past, about this guy that he reveres' past. And it's that interplay between Salieri's memory, the history of Mozart as an important classical figure, and the way that their rivalry informs his view of himself and his own history, that makes this so much more compelling than your average biopic. Again, as I said, it's not trying to tell the highlights of Mozart's life. It's about Salieri's view of Mozart as a great composer, as his friend / rival / whatever. But also, the film is, especially in the later parts, also about Mozart's personal life. And I think the fact that we're balancing all these different perspectives and themes through Salieri's retrospection on his history is really, really fascinating. And the fact that we're cutting between flashbacks and quote-unquote real time keeps it really, really snappy. It's because maybe you're spending a little bit too much time in the past, and then boom, you're back out, and Salieri is an old man, and he's sitting in his chair, and he's waving his hands around. You're like, this is interesting again. And you can cut back to any other point in time after that.
Tucker, I think you bring up a great point about how Salieri reveres Mozart, but I think the most interesting aspect of this film is how he reviles him at the same time. It is the interplay.
A creature.
Thank you. It is the conflict that Salieri feels within himself about Mozart, and how that develops over the course of the film, that is so interesting to me. And I think F. Murray Abraham is so good at portraying that with the dialogue reading, but also just the facial acting that he does. I think of a few key moments towards the beginning of the film when he has to convince himself that this piece that he heard from Mozart at the very beginning of the film is a fluke. This grotesque, debaucherous man cannot be the voice of God. Because that's how Salieri views music. It is the voice of God that is spoken through him and many other composers. He's like, it has to be a fluke. And then we get to the point where Amadeus visits him in the Emperor of Austria's palace, and Salieri has written this piece for the march for Amadeus to enter to, and on a moment's notice, Amadeus memorizes the piece, can play it from memory perfectly, I might add.
As it says through the subtitles, plays piece perfectly, which was really funny.
And yet improves upon it. And Salieri knows this immediately. And you can see the disgust, the hatred, the envy on F. Murray Abraham's face, and it's fantastic. And those same like mixture of emotions come across throughout his performance in a number of moments. And then, of course, it gets a bit complicated towards the end, where he actually sits down with Mozart and writes the piece that he hired Mozart to secretly write for his own funeral. He writes that piece with him, and you can see his demeanor soften a little bit. You can see that hatred sort of melt away as he really just lets himself bask in Mozart's genius. And like, this guy is incredible, and I'm not envious anymore. I'm just really excited to be working with him on this piece. And then Mozart dies. And that is the grand irony of Salieri's life, Salieri's role in this film, the cruel irony.
Yeah, I think the film makes a stupendously smart decision in featuring Salieri, and that ending is just, this is film just like, it sticks the landing really, really well. I think the ending, it so complicates everything that we've seen beforehand. It recontextualizes it, it reframes it in a way where I look at Salieri and I'm just like, is he misguided? You know, he gets to write the piece at the end. We're getting in the end. Let's talk about it. He gets to, like, literally his wish was to write the word of God in the music. And he kind of gets that wish in the end by being the one to write down what Mozart's doing. And logically speaking,
he's God's stenographer.
He's God's stenographer. And if you were to think, logistically for that scene, the only way that anyone could keep up with Mozart in his state and his ways, like, oh, it's like this and blah, 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 was if they were a pretty damn good, only like one spot behind him composer. And so essentially only Salieri could be here to do that role in that moment, even though maybe he sets it up in the film, maybe he does, it's Mozart's own doing that he ends up in this state. I think that the way this film both gives him in a way that he doesn't want, gives Salieri his goal. He sort of realizes it, but then in the way that it's just also like taken from him, and he doesn't achieve his goal, and he doesn't kill Mozart. Mozart kind of kills himself. That way is like it makes our character, and then we cut back to him at the end, I can see that like pain in his eyes throughout the whole film, but only after I've seen that final scene. And I think that this ending is one of a new favorite way to end a movie, I think.
Yeah. Quick bit of trivia about that final scene when Amadeus is dictating the score in his head to Salieri, just because we brought that up. Tom Holtz was actually skipping lines of dialogue that they had rehearsed to really get that confusion, that hurriedness out of F. Murray Abraham. He's skipping lines that they rehearsed, so F. Murray Abraham is like struggling to keep up with him as actors. So that's really cool.
And actually, another piece of trivia about that same moment is that in that scene, in order to keep the beat and the tune of the song they're composing, they had earpieces in. And there were moments where the earpiece wouldn't work, and that would create pauses and even more confusion. And so it's like the improvised nature of that scene, it comes from like a confluence of different factors, which is really fascinating. And also, I just want to point this out, that I think that is one of the best uses of sound design in this film, is when Mozart is telling Salieri which instruments do what and on what beat, and you slowly hear the different instruments build in and match what Tom Holtz is saying and singing to Salieri, and they build out and they build in, and then like it builds to the actual song playing, and that's like a really interesting moment of sound design, sound mixing that uses the acting and the kineticism of that scene, but like with the actual powerful music that Mozart wrote, whatever, 700, 800 years ago, something like that.
Yeah, Tucker, you
that.
stole my point in part, because I think that to the point about editing, be it visual or sound editing, the film is both incredibly stylish and sort of overt, but it also has these sort of continual editing ideas, as you're saying, Tucker, about sort of this superimposition of music into thought, and then music into this like almost pseudo-diegetic space in the world where, does Mozart hear this out loud? Is he hearing this music? Is this for the benefit of the audience? I think that sort of psychological line blurs a little bit by that choice, which is really effective. But the film is also, that's comparatively subtle to like what is, I think, one of the match cuts of all time. Get this guy out of here. Get that Space Odyssey match cut out of here.
Yeah.
Because that the crumpled paper into the horses running in the field cut is fantastic.
Oh yeah.
The film is able to do these very stylish and fast and effective cuts, but it's also able to use these techniques that you guys have been discussing in this bedroom scene and what is ostensibly just a long series of shot or reverse shot as these two guys are talking, and that's it. It's not flashy, but it's got this effective sound design, and it's just a really great encapsulation of, as to your point, Tanner, the strength of the performances. Because there's you're talking about this sort of sense of improvisation.
Yeah.
But there's this much
like we have here on Back Lot Banter.
Yes.
We're a little good at it too.
There's this much, in my opinion, stronger sense of desperation that both of the actors communicate very, very well. They're like two magnets. You couldn't pull their focus apart with a crowbar. And I think it's very easy to get sucked into that also. Sure tried. As they're just going back and forth, and you feel the panic. You're like, Mozart's doing all. You gotta write down the rest or whatever the hell you write down on a sheet of music, right? You gotta take notes. You gotta write down the letters. And so I think you just get sucked into that moment, and it just exemplifies to me in just a couple minutes of screen time why this film works so well.
Yeah. And that is the culmination of all of these themes that are focused through Salieri's like weird obsession with Amadeus that starts when he's a kid and wants to be Amadeus and wants to compose, and his dad keeps telling him, oh no, that kid's like a trained monkey, and you get these shots of the streets of Vienna where just crazy shit is happening. A guy's swallowing a sword, there's a dog like walking on a ball, and you're like, I don't know what's going on in Vienna, but I want to be there. I want to see some of this shit. But that he, from childhood, always revered the work of Mozart. And it isn't until he's disillusioned to the fact that the great composers, the great creators of human history are not flawless human beings, and they can be vulgar, ridiculous wackos like Mozart is in this film, that the themes of this film like really start to bubble up, and you like can see on F. Mary Abraham's face the simultaneous like jealousy and pleasure and discontent of like realizing that like everything he's known is a lie, and like he has to like reframe his life around Mozart not being a great guy. And you watch that process sort of like ebb and flow throughout the movie, because the movie really is a balancing act of Salieri being like, oh my god, this guy's ridiculous, he's chasing women, he's saying weird things to kings, and then simultaneously like 2 minutes later having Mozart's music played to him, and he'd be like, oh no, he is the voice of God. This is one of the greatest creators that ever lived, and he has to wrestle with this. And then he feels like stuck in the middle, and he's worried about his own mediocrity, as he continuously says throughout the film. And it's like the ultimate form of, oh god, what's the phrase? I'm forgetting it, but like you're an artist
Imposter
and you
syndrome.
feel like imposter syndrome. Thank you. He feels like he isn't as great because he's being overshadowed by Mozart, but also he recognizes in some levels that he's better in Mozart in social situations, because Amadeus is a complete degenerate loser.
I would argue that maybe that Salieri doesn't so much wrestle with this realization as he copes with it in a particular way. He's hopped up on copium, as the kids like to say.
Sure.
And that particular copium is religion. I find it so interesting, and this is a whole other thing that I could get into. Salieri and religion are so interesting in how they are used in this film, because he essentially declares war on God.
Yeah,
he says so much in the film, and
he
he's
burns
like,
the cross.
Exactly. He's like, God is clearly like out to get me specifically because of something that I did, I don't know what, but God is being cruel to me, and so I will inflict that subsequent cruelness onto the man, the vehicle of God's cruelty to me, Amadeus. I will torture him. I will stick knives, metaphorically, of course, into him by torturing him, by making him create this piece that reminds him of his father, which is always which we come to understand is a real point of anxiety for Amadeus. I will, embarrass his wife in front of this servant of the Emperor of Austria. I'll do all these things because God did this to me.
Yeah, the thing that he has with God, I don't know, I'm not a religious man, so I don't know what that whole, that dynamic is like, God forbid. But is that he thinks that God has given him the ability to understand Mozart's genius on a way that no one else can, but he's also the only one that can truly see how ridiculous it is that the voice of God is in the body and mind of the ridiculous little monkey boy. And the one thing I do want to say is one of the things I do know about the director's cut is that scene where he embarrasses Constance is only in the director's cut. And that is probably the most explicitly malicious act that Salieri that we saw does in the film. So that's an interesting choice. And I think probably, I don't know if you guys want to discuss if it's a good thing or not to include that scene in the film, but I think it does quite reframe the maliciousness of him as a character, because if you think of it, otherwise he's doing some gossip, he's doing a little bit of backstabbing, but he's never. Is that something funny?
We do a little backstabbing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Is it really that bad? He's doing
a little bit of trolling, but he sexually harasses his Constance, Amadeus' wife, in that scene, and the inclusion of that scene in the director's cut is a real moment of reframing Salieri's characters and his intentions. He's able to go to this length and do this to this poor woman who's just trying to help her husband, and that's one of my least favorite scenes in the movie. And I think it was, at least for me, probably the right call to not include it in the theatrical cut. But also, we can't watch the theatrical cut anymore. Apparently, I don't really know even how we would find it if it's been scrubbed from internet sources.
Tucker, so why didn't you like that sequence? Is it because it's so openly malicious on Salieri's side?
Yes, because Salieri, without that, is a character you can see as having this internal conflict about, is he pleasing God? What can he do? How is he going to orchestrate the downfall of Amadeus? But he's also someone who is respectful of music and knows where to stop, knows what boundaries not to cross. And that's a boundary that he only crosses in this one scene. And it makes me feel like he's more of a malicious character. And without that, I think he's more nuanced. And I don't see him as openly and explicitly malicious for the rest of the film after I've seen that sequence.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It makes me think, though, in the scene previous where he tells Constance, do you want this job? Do you want your husband to get this job? You come see me later tonight. Do you think that scene also shows up only in the director's cut? Or
I think yes. I think he actually, I haven't seen it. I only listened to a conversation about it. But I think he just leaves the room when she's offering him the papers. I think there's that moment of him flipping through the pages, which is a really good editing sequence. But then he hands it back to her and then just leaves the room when she asks him, okay, so are you actually going to consider it? And that's a pretty big change for what essentially our main character is willing to do in this film.
He's not a good person. And I don't think that the removal of that scene changes much. It's sort of assumed that he goes and he lies that Mozart is molesting women so he can't get any pupils. He is very openly malicious, and it's sort of, the entire film is about that. I don't think that scene does anything for me other than reinforce what I feel is sort of at the heart of the movie, which is larger than religion, which is sort of a sort of a lack of understanding of your place in the world when it changes around you.
Sure.
And I think that the film uses religion and art as sort of a lens into that, because ultimately we have that moment when it becomes, it shows up a couple times when he's talking about doing La Figaro, but also when he's doing the first opera, and they're trying to figure out what language should it be in.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion that Salieri and his sort of inner circle are maybe not the most talented composers and
Yeah.
social voices and ruling body. They're not the best, but they are the ruling class, and they're trying to hold on to their understanding of culture in the world. And you almost, in my opinion, you see Salieri try to reconcile this with God. He's like, you're showing me this guy who's subverting my belief in art and music. He's almost using that as a way to deflect from the fact that really what he's seeing is a world that doesn't look like the one he understands. It's a world that's being dominated by this young man who's vulgar and crass and wants to make music in German. And he doesn't care about Italian, and he doesn't understand what the king is. He doesn't understand what the king is saying. He thinks there should be ballet and all of this stuff.
God forbid, you know?
I think
God
what's
forbid.
interesting about Salieri is that I don't necessarily view him as purely evil as so much as unable to intuit the world around him anymore. And he ascribes the issues to God and to Constance and to music and to Mozart. But it's really his own ability to reconcile where he sits in a changing world that causes him to do all of that. And I think the fact that he sexually harasses Constance, but then leaves, to me that didn't feel premeditated. It felt like everything he's doing, he doesn't know what he's going to do 5 seconds from now.
Mm-hmm.
He's just making decisions because he doesn't have any understanding of the world anymore. And I think that's what makes his character compelling to me.
That's how I read.
Sorry, go ahead, Timo.
That's how I read that whole scene. Also, was that it was just like it's a snap decision that then because he's vowed celibacy earlier in the film, then immediately the implication is clear what he wants Constance to come and do that night, but that becomes an additional point of character drama wherein his desire to screw over Mozart is so large that it leads him to do something that is against his vow to God. And he comes to realize that in that moment when Constance takes her clothes off and is like, oh, like that is the line I'm not crossing. He has a line and we find it in that scene, and he will traumatize her and he will intimidate her, but he will not put a finger on her because that's breaking his vow to God. That's at least how I read that scene.
And I think that points to Salieri's narcissism. I think that's something that's a strong element of his character, and how it plays with his religion. Because he is a narcissist who views himself as a lowly servant of God, but it's all self-imposed. He says, "Oh, I'll be chaste. I'll be a servant. I'll be so philanthropic and all these things." We never see him do any philanthropic acts, of course. But as a way
we do
to...
see, he says, I gave lessons, and many of them for free, and it's like, all these women come over and get lessons from him, and I'm like, yeah, those are the free lessons.
Yeah. But it's all self-imposed in a way that he's like, this is my bargain with God, so I can be the greatest musician. And he views himself as that. It doesn't really matter whether or not he is until he meets Amadeus, and what a person that he views as better than him from the word go, essentially. And I think that's interesting, and I think he's a sociopath in that it doesn't really matter who he hurts so long as he hurts Amadeus. Sorry, April.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that point that you raised about his narcissism is that his ultimate plan to make Mozart write his own sort of like funeral procession is to the benefit of nobody but himself.
Yeah, he gets to take credit for it though.
Right, but ultimately he has been shown to be a praised musician. His praise or status is never in jeopardy. He is always considered by Mozart to be a superior. He is always looked to for advice. He is given the award for having the most empowering, or whatever it is, the best opera in Vienna is given to him.
He got the first Emmy.
Yes,
I think so.
His desire to have Mozart write his own funeral music benefits nobody but him. Mozart It's not like he's going to reveal to Mozart on his deathbed, look at what I made you do. It's not even that. It's an entirely internal conflict he's having, wherein nobody knows that he succeeds or loses except for himself. And I think that's what makes the character of the priest, who is part of this frame narrative, so interesting. Because ultimately, the priest says very little, but
Does he
becomes
say
this...
anything?
10 lines, I believe.
Yeah, he becomes this just canvas for this interpersonal conflict to be sort of projected onto, because there was nobody knew. One of the most interesting things about that final scene we were discussing earlier is that Mozart is so thankful that Salieri is there.
Yeah.
It's not even clear to his antagonist that he's being antagonized. You know, so I think that's what makes, to your point, Tanner, the narcissism and this confusion, this lack of understanding or sort of like ability to just accept his position in the world. That's why I think it's so powerful and really at the core of what the movie's trying to say.
Yeah, and I think he's also obsessed with what Mozart thinks about him to a certain extent.
Oh,
because
very
when he's
obsessed.
in that masquerade party and Amadeus he's like flexing his knowledge in music and his ability. He's like, give me someone to play. I'll play anybody. And he says, oh, this person's boring. This person's boring. And Salieri's behind his mask says, play Salieri. And he's like, and Amadeus says, now that is a challenge. And then farts during while playing like a very simple like bum 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 sort of
It's
piece.
the thing of Schroeder from Peanuts going bing bing bing
Yeah.
bing bing bing
Yeah.
bing 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 bing.
Yeah.
It's ostensibly the like $500 million version of that, whatever this movie costs.
And as repentance for that, Salieri is like, I'm going to psychologically torture this man into his death. That's how much he has insulted me personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that I want to quickly go over the wins and noms here for this movie, because this movie is one of the most successful movies in Oscars history because it was nominated for 11 awards and won 8 of them, which is on both levels like incredibly high. So for the ones that it was nominated for that it didn't win, it includes cinematography and film editing. Both of which are fantastic in this movie. There's one more that I haven't mentioned yet, but it was nominated for obviously Best Picture, it won Best Picture, it won Best Director for Milos Forman, it won Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup, and Best Sound, and it also won for F. Murray Abraham won for Best Actor, and Tom Hulce was also nominated for Best Actor. One of the few times in Oscars history where 2 people from the same film were nominated for that leading role award, which I think makes this film really interesting. I think what the film's balance by the end becomes so Mozart-centric that it isn't, even though we've been talking mostly about Salieri for this, it's framed through his eyes, but it is like, it's like 3/5, 2/5 in terms of, it's a little bit more Salieri, but it's also quite a bit about Mozart's personal life. And we get a lot of scenes where Salieri isn't present at all. There's like, I don't know, like a 15-minute sequence somewhere nearing the end where we don't even see Salieri because we're just worried about Mozart's life at home and the dynamic with his father and his wife and the fact that they're having a child and needing to make money because he's completely broke and he's teetering on the edge. The fact that we get 2 completely well-rounded characters and the time split between them feels fulfilling, but also fulfills the weird subversion of, oh, this is actually not a Mozart story because it leans a little bit more Salieri than it does Mozart, is really fascinating. But it also gives Tom Hulce, who I think, for me at least, is the standout performance of this film, a lot of time to delve into this character. Because frankly, when we were starting this film, and I knew it wasn't about Mozart specifically, and there was this weird framing thing, but I thought, like, oh, you know, it's going to be, oh, this is fun. Mozart's going to be a side character, like, kind of in the background the whole time. But that's not true, and he does become a core central focus of the film, especially nearing the end, and it gives Tom Hulce a huge opportunity to explore a lot of range for this character that is incredibly talented and recognizes his own genius in very specific and overt ways, and viewing his creative process kind of fulfills that, like, deep-seated need when we're watching a movie like this to, like, see the great person do the great thing that I almost thought this movie wasn't going to show. So it's really fun to watch Salieri for that first, a little over half of the film, be like, oh, Mozart's great, but also he's a dumb monkey guy. And then by the end, you get to see Mozart be a dumb monkey guy, but also be the genius that we know that he is.
Yeah. I think that comes across in a couple ways. And you're right, I did want to talk more about Tom Hulce as Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
Yes. Wolfie,
excuse me. Because he is great in his debauchery, of course, but as we get portions of the film that focus on him, it is that debauchery, that childlike sort of demeanor that he has is to cover up darker trauma that he has. He's been, Salieri's father says it, he's been a performing animal since age 5 or something like that. And I think his relationship with his father is quite a bit of a focus here, and I love the reintroduction of Mozart's father, and when he's like posed at the top of the stairs, and like a bum bum bum, almost kind of moment, but it's like it's obviously grander than that. And then his dad like flips out his cape like in a Nosferatu sort of moment,
which I just watched.
But Mozart is like, "Daddy," as he comes coming down the stairs.
Yeah, it's like the most menacing father you could ever fatherly
most
entrance.
Menacing father with banjo.
Most menacing fatherly entrance, and yet the way he reacts is like so opposite to what I thought was going to happen in that scene.
And the interplay that Mozart has with his father is the relationship there is very clear. That he fears his father, but yet wants his praise at the same time. And his father is still a very domineering role in his life, and all these things. But also, I just want to shout out, completely switching gears, Tom Hulce performing and writing and stuff like that is fantastic. Apparently, he practiced for 6 hours a day for 6 months to be able to accurately play these Mozart pieces. And as apparently music experts have pointed out in this film, none of us are are music experts in those ways. What you see is what you hear in this. When they're playing those notes on the piano, that is what you are hearing. They're not futzing around with that.
Which is cool. Thanks for the dedication.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I was trying to notice, because there's moments where you'll just see hands.
Yeah.
And the camera will pan back up. It won't cut back to a face. So I was like, is he doing that? And I think that's quite impressive because the film, I think, situates him in a very interesting way because he begins as something to be looked at. Literally, he's introduced to this sequence of voyeurism as we're hiding behind like the sweet tarts or whatever, all those little puff pastries we got here in this room, and Mozart's literally just something to look at and laugh at. That's what he is. And then we come to sit with him more, and we begin to realize that he is, as you're saying, Tanner, incredibly tormented. I mean, he's got like a 25-foot Super Mario 64 style painting of his father in black on the wall behind him, right? And I think it's then compelling watching that arc of him going from this just kind of goofy and endearing kid to this man who is deeply, deeply addicted to alcohol and addicted to his work and unable to find anything in his life of meaning beyond that. And I think that's a really compelling and sad arc to follow, which then makes the fact that you are looking at the movie through Salieri's eyes for so much of it even more conflicting.
Yeah,
because he's such a broken but ultimately well-intentioned person.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing both these intimate moments of his failures, but then these voyeuristic moments of his like public clownishness. And the actual Mozart just gets so lost in that shuffle.
Yeah, I think that the reason why Mozart ends up at the end being a compelling, but like a character that we resonate with above like, oh, he's just ridiculous and a genius, is that there is that well-intentioned nature to him. He's not doing any of the ridiculous things that he's doing with ill intent. He's not out to hurt anyone. He has this genuine care for music, and I really love the moments where he recognizes his own, how imbalanced his own persona is in the world of he said something like, I might be the most ridiculous guy you've ever seen, but I assure you my music is not. Terribly paraphrased. I couldn't write this movie with a 20-foot pole. It'd be very hard to write with the pencil on the end of that.
Yeah.
But is that we end up learning that he is doing all this with like genuine intent and that he's not malicious, and that makes him a person that we can empathize with, even if we're looking at him in both the biggest extremes possible of looking at him like he's just like a trash guy on the street or the greatest creator that the world has ever known.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up Tucker. You talk about his creations, his work, and
Music.
yeah, his music, of course.
Yes.
And
Many
I think
ways.
it's so interesting.
So many
Something I caught on to was the operas that we see in the film. We see a number of them. The ones that are not written and directed by Mozart are in English, and yet all of Mozart's are in German or Italian or what have you. And I find that really interesting.
I thought
that it.
Oh. Yeah, I guess you're right.
Unless I'm misremembering, but I seem to have caught that, and I think it's maybe to bring across these feelings of this one is like real. It's high art to English
Sure.
audiences who don't understand that language, whereas the other ones we understand, but we can't understand the Mozart ones because they are such strokes of genius. And
Yeah, you could be right about that.
I thought
Yeah.
that they were just translating the stuff that should be in German into English because they speak English out loud in the movie, in which they would have been speaking German out loud.
Yeah, and without accents at all, I might add.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, on that point, I like that they don't speak with accents.
No, I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
okay.
It was also Milos Forman distinctly told them to don't worry about the accents. He wanted them to focus on the character itself and not getting like 100% the accent right or anything like that.
Which leads to performances that feel more grounded, feels like these people are really talking to each other. And I'm like, yeah, the Austrians were not speaking English. Even if they were, we got to write the opera. Like, come on, like, don't do that. Don't do a stupid accent like we do. Like,
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
we're smart. We can understand that this is a movie. You don't need.
It also helps the movie feel more like modern and relatable, especially with
Yes.
the characters, because they are ridiculous. They're wearing those giant wigs.
Oh,
and
I love the
it's-
wigs. I love the wigs in this
It's the
movie.
fact that it.
The costume and hair is fantastic in this. I just want to say, gotta shout that
Yeah.
out. But continue,
Well,
Tucker. Sorry.
Absolutely, but I think it is. It's fantastic in the fact that it's so over the toply grandiose that
Yeah.
the film is in this weird subversive way focused on the imperfections and immaturities of the upper class, and the fact that they might think they're the greatest, but and like in retrospect, people really revere Mozart. Oh, but there is this immaturity. There's this human, more relatable, more ridiculous, wacky side to these characters, which is why I love this movie. It has a sense of humor to it, and the fact that these characters are sometimes saying like turns of phrase and words that like no, even translated, I don't think that those words
Yeah.
would translate to something that someone would say in 1984 when this movie was made. And I think that again, that makes it more relatable, but also like I was able to connect to it more, but also understand the humor and also the reverence that people have for these high class and also high art people that I personally have always like held at a distance. As I don't like classical music, I don't like seeing live music. I only recognize like the one tune that he played at the beginning. I didn't even recognize most of the Mozart here. But I was able to understand them on a character and human level a little better because it was presented through English. They didn't have the ridiculous accents, and the movie had a sense of fun with itself. We weren't watching the Queen in Shakespeare in Love that's like very regal and serious and like
Great movie.
this is how it. And it's presented like this is what history is like. It's very serious and it's important and blah 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 blah. No, these are just like people that have their pettiness and have their eccentricities, just like we do in the modern day.
Yeah, I think that
Tucker,
works a lot to make the movie relatable and easily digestible by a modern audience.
Absolutely, yes, that's a great term phrase there.
Tucker, you mentioned not being a big fan of classical music, but people in 1984 apparently were because the soundtrack for this film, the all Mozart soundtrack, of course, charted number 56 on the Billboard charts back in '84
For a soundtrack,
making it
very impressive.
Yeah, one of the most successful classical music albums ever. I think there was also a funny joke made at the Academy Awards by the composer for Passage to India, the David Lean film that won Best Score that year, where he said he's just glad that the score for Amadeus wasn't eligible, of course, because it was
Entirely
old Mozart stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also just want to shout out I want to shout out Mozart's body being chucked into a mass grave.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Ooh, yeah.
I think I was thinking for a minute that the movie was going to go on too long because we reached that moment of high tension and then the death, and I'm like, brother, do we really need to show more? What's going to happen here of substance? But I think the idea that this man whose life was so culturally significant and was manifested itself so large in Salieri's head, he just gets thrown in a pit with everybody else, and a shovel full of lies chucked on top in the rain, and that's it.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it. I think it's a really melancholy and interesting way to end his story on, because then we go back to the insane asylum, jail, hospital, hotel thing that Salieri is in, and he continues on.
For
Mhm.
a
I think
long
that-
time that he makes a point
Yeah.
of. We don't ever, which what a great revelation. Well, we get it because he looks old as shit in the hospital, but
Yeah.
he says, "Oh, it's 39 years," and I go, "Man, that's a long time to live with like zero purpose in your life." Because this Salieri's entire purpose is to be rid of Mozart, and he is,
Yeah.
but he wasn't
Yeah.
because of the way the film ends. He's unsatisfied for all those years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mozart gets to, die young and live on in fame, and Salieri gets to grow old and fall into obscurity.
Yeah.
The grand irony, the cruel irony of Antonio Salieri.
It's a good film that's really well written when you drop something like the whole playing the priest the music bit at the beginning,
Mhm.
and the only music you recognize is Mozart. You're in for a good movie if that's how you open the film. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
That's incredibly clever.
And that part in the opening of the film was my first because now it's time for Timo's sound talk.
Okay, here we go.
Wherein we get to see the what I think is really impressive about the film is these moments where the characters reference music a lot, and we've talked about it in other parts of the film earlier, but where the characters like hum along or like are describing what is happening, and they are doing it in time. Do you have any trivia? So for that one scene at the end of the film, they're wearing earpieces. In the rest of the film, probably
Yeah,
earpieces.
the music was played on set.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I figured
it's
something
not
like that.
Yeah.
But the timing of that and the forethought to be like, okay, this scene in the theater, it sounds like we hear the music in time with the dude talking. That requires a lot of prep and a lot of work to get done. And so once I like realized what was happening, I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, but wait, it like just I'm very impressed by the technicality of that and the way that it is used many times, and that like the interiority of our characters in which we hear possibly what Mozart hears. Does he, when he looks at the page, does he hear the score? Does he hear the music ring out? It kind of seems like Salieri does for sure, but that idea that the audience can be brought with, it just makes it so much easier. Like if you're trying to understand classical music and you can literally have like a character intelligently explaining what is going on in this music that you're supposed to know, at least.
Yeah.
It makes it so that's a nice thing to do to the viewer, which it doesn't assume that they know about the subject, that not everyone does, but in an artistic and thematic and story cohesive way, like kind of just helps you out, gives you a leg up in understanding. And the way that it's used throughout the film in a number of times is very well done. And that editing, man, must have taken freaking forever to get that to sound right.
Fellas,
Timo,
should we
Speaking of score,
release our ingenious, masterful scores that will be remembered for the rest of time? Or who among us' score will fade into obscurity and be forgotten?
Wow.
Among Us.
Thank you. I regretted it as I said it, and thank you for making that regret well founded, Abram.
Some character in this movie says "amongst us." I'm like, oh, he was.
God, oh my God. What could have
Ever think about how our brains are broken from that? Just like forever, probably.
Yeah.
3, 2,
2,
1.
1.
Wait.
Beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop. Calculating.
Calculating. Wow.
Nice.
There we go. We got a score. It is
Ooh.
the exact
Oh
same
my
score
God.
as the film from the previous episode, 9.2. So we're going to have to do a little tie breaking between In
Ooh.
Amadeus and In the Heat of the Night. Good thing both of those are right on the top of our memory. The point breakdown started from the top. Abram gave it a 9.7. Tucker gave it a 9.3. Tanner gave it a 9.2, and I gave it an 8.5. So yeah, there we are.
This is for the 10th position. I'm going Amadeus above.
Okay.
I'm going in the heat of the night.
I'm going in the heat of the night.
I'm also gonna go in the heat of the night. Sorry, Abram.
Ooh, that's fine. They're both great movies.
They're both
great
fantastic films.
God, this is a great top 10, guys.
Yeah. Well, top 11, huh?
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, yeah.
No, I wasn't counting Amadeus.
No.
It's a great top 10.
Yeah. So yeah, that means that Amadeus will go at number 11, above No Country for Old Men and below In the Heat of the Night.
That's a good triple feature.
Well,
It's a long triple feature.
Well, there you go. Our first movie of 2023 on the list. And for a while, the last one, because we're going to move over to a little shorter, more manageable, easily or digested list for the next set of films that we're going to be doing. But man, very enjoyable to round out this big chapter of Quest ends and begins with the Oscar ceremony. So there we go. Amadeus, spot number 11.
Yeah. Rock and roll, everyone. Thank you for watching on this singular one channel. But of course, remember, if you made it this far, you got to go to Back Lot Banter for the rest of Quest. And that includes and is being kicked off with Everything Everywhere All at Once as part of our 2023 Oscar nominations, or 2022, however you want to slice it. The ones from this past year.
The ones that haven't come out yet.
And yes, this one is coming out on the 18th, so yes, we are guessing the nominations. That is 100% what we're doing.
We feel
are
pretty
guessing.
confident, okay? We feel
We're
we're
pretty
gonna look
confident.
like giant idiots. We're gonna have video evidence of us being idiots, but that's not true somehow.
Hey,
Our
lots of people are going to have
schedule.
video evidence of them being idiots. If
Right.
Everything Everywhere.
Our
doesn't get
schedule
nominated.
requires that we record an episode on like the day that the nominations come out, and so we need to guess. But I think it's a good guess. We shall see, of course. The Academy could do something funny, but Everything Everywhere All at Once is a film that I have yet to see.
Oh.
I didn't catch it when it came out in theaters almost a year ago. And then just kind of, I don't know.
Seen it 3 times.
There's a 4K copy in my mailbox right now, which I'm going to go grab as soon as we hit stop recording.
It's still
I
out
stole
there?
it, actually.
Oh.
No.
I opened it too.
Wanna
I'm
see
a
me do
federal
it again?
criminal. Okay. Thanks for watching, everybody.
We will see you for Everything Everywhere All at Once over on Back Lot Banter. Until then, peace.
I knew the... He has no courage. He has lead poisoning from the paint that he puts on his face. And he's a munchkin who hung himself. All the worst parts of The Wizard of Oz.
Hanged.
Hanged himself, excuse me. I cannot confirm or deny if those midgets were hung. I know they were hanged.
Might have been both.
Fucking both, brother.
God, we should not be joking about it.
You know, they had like sex parties in the hotel or whatever. They were having a grand old time.
They're little people, Tanner. That's what
Excuse
they
me.
do.